The Atlantic waters were calm the night that Thomas Odom set out for a solo fishing trip near Fort Fisher. It was the fall, 1988. The moon cast a silver glow across the waves as he cast his line. Thomas was enjoying the peace that only the deep night could bring. But then, that peace was shattered. A silent, triangular craft hovered over the water, barely making a sound, the only exception a low hum that sent vibrations through Thomas's chest. He froze. His fishing rod slipped from his grasp. Suddenly, a blinding column of light engulfed his boat. The sensation of being pulled upward overwhelmed him. Then, nothing. When he regained consciousness, the sun was rising. His coffee, poured hours earlier, it was still warm. But his watch, well, it showed 6 hours of his life had vanished. Thomas gathered himself, but then he began to notice fresh, circular marks on his arms, as if something had marked him. In the following weeks, well, the nightmares began. Visions of sterile rooms, figures looming over him, a sensation of floating above his own body. When Thomas finally got the nerve to tell his story, as you might believe, he was met with disbelief. But he found out he wasn't alone. Other fishermen had seen strange lights over the water, and some even admitted that they, too, had experienced missing time. For centuries, the Brown Mountain Lights have mystified those who gaze upon them. The flickering orbs, sometimes white, other times reddish orange. They appear above the Pisgah National Forest, seemingly moving with an eerie intelligence all their own. Scientists have theorized about gases, atmospheric reflections. Some even say it's seismic activity. But for those who have encountered them up close, these lights hold a far more terrifying truth. In the early 1980s, a group of 4 campers set out into the Brown Mountains. They were eager to catch a glimpse of the famous lights. They hiked deep into the forest and set up a camp on a ridge with an unobstructed view of the valley down below. As night fell, the lights, well, they appeared. First distant and bobbing, and then suddenly rushing toward them. The campers were at first completely exhilarated, and that faded as they quickly became uneasy. Then came the deafening silence. No wind, no crickets, just an unnatural stillness filled the valley. Before anyone could react, everything went totally black. Hours later, they awoke in a different section of the forest. Their sleeping bags and belongings were all scattered. The fire they had built was still smoldering, but their watches all showed 4 hours had passed. One camper, we'll just refer to him as David S., experienced months of nightmares afterwards. Visions of tall, thin figures examining him under blinding lights, his body paralyzed, unable to move, his thoughts invaded by something non-human, otherworldly. Locals whisper that the Brown Mountain Lights are more than just a natural phenomenon, that they are a beacon for something watching from above. It was a quiet September evening in 1967 when Harold Dees drove home through the back roads of Edenton, North Carolina. His old pickup truck rumbled along the dirt path. The field stretched endlessly on either side. He was only a few miles from home. That's when he saw it. A gleaming object hovering over a pasture, its metallic surface reflecting the moonlight. Thinking it was a downed plane, Harold pulled over, and as soon as he stepped out of his truck, the craft released a blinding light. Harold's entire body seized. He was paralyzed. Suddenly, shadowy figures emerged from the craft, tall, with elongated heads and thin fingers. Though their mouths never moved, Harold could hear them speaking inside his mind. Then, everything went dark. When Harold came to, he was sitting in his truck, some 20 miles away. No memory of how he got there. His gas tank, it was nearly empty. His watch, well, it indicated a total of 4 hours had passed. Harold was scared, shaking. He drove home. Later that day, he discovered small burn marks on his arms. The local sheriff, he dismissed his story. But others in town reported seeing strange lights that night as well. And nearby cattle, well, for algorithm purposes, let's just say they were found unusually agitated, as if disturbed by something unseen. Bobby Andrews loved hiking alone in the Great Smoky Mountains, often venturing into uncharted trails. But on an autumn morning in 1992, Bobby's trek into the wilderness led him straight into something beyond human comprehension. Bobby's last radio call was to the ranger station, a normal call. He reported having a great view, weather was great, and he had plans to return by dusk. But Bobby never came back. The search team found his campsite intact, his gear untouched, but no sign of Bobby. Days later, a hunter reported finding a man wandering in a daze, almost 40 miles from Bobby Andrews' last known location. It was indeed Bobby. He was in a state of confusion, completely unable to explain what had happened. His clothes were clean, though. His boots, they showed no signs of a 40-mile trek. And the only thing he kept repeating over and over again was simply, "They let me go." When he finally spoke in full, he described a flash of light, the sensation of being weightless, and strange figures examining him in a glowing white room. The strangest part, Bobby's watch showed that only 2 hours had passed, despite the fact that he had been missing for a total of 5 days. Bobby Andrews left North Carolina soon after and has never spoke of the event again. In 2009, a truck driver named Jerry McCullen was traveling down a remote stretch of highway near Asheville, North Carolina, when his rig's electronics suddenly shut down. A brilliant light flooded the road ahead, revealing an enormous disc-shaped craft. Jerry said he exited his truck, and suddenly an unnatural stillness surrounded him. The air felt heavy, and time seemed to stretch, and his body was locked in a strange paralysis. Now later, Jerry described himself being back inside his truck, hours missing from his memory, His CB radio crackled. Another driver's frantic voice asked if he'd seen the light too. Jerry's hands trembled as he checked his watch. And just like in all the other stories tonight, it was 3 hours later than what he had remembered. Following the incident, nightmares began to plague him too. Visions floating through endless, cold, white corridors. Instruments being pressed against his skin. Inhuman eyes staring deep inside his soul. Skeptics, well, they dismissed his story too. But the strange burn marks on his arms and the magnetic interference with his truck that night, well, they remain unexplained.
In 1993, the sleepy town of Thomasville, North Carolina, became the site of a terrifying extraterrestrial encounter. Bethany Caldwell, a single mother, had just put her children to bed when a piercing hum filled the air. Looking outside, she saw an enormous triangular craft hovering above the fields behind her home. Before she could scream, her body stiffened and an invisible force pulled her skyward. Bethany awoke on a cold metal table, unable to move. Shadowy, thin figures surrounded her, their almond-shaped eyes unblinking. They communicated without speaking, showing her images of Earth's fragile future, wars, disasters, and a warning about humanity's fate. Then, as suddenly as she had been taken, she was back in her living room. Hours had passed. Strange symbols marked her wrist, and her children later spoke of glowing figures watching from their windows that night. Bethany, like the rest of us would have done, never spent another night alone on the farm.
For decades, a mystery has surrounded Cove City, North Carolina. Locals have reported seeing a strange floating light move through the darkness, often appearing along abandoned stretches of road or hovering near a railroad track. Some witnesses describe it as a single glowing orb. Sometimes it's white, sometimes a reddish-orange hue color. It flickers and moves around unpredictably. Yet others claim the lights will follow them in the car or if they're walking out on the highway, and it will vanish just as suddenly as it appeared. The following is the story of an encounter with the legend of the Cove City Light. It was a chilly October night in 1983 when Tim and Lisa, along with their friends Dave and Michelle, Tim and Lisa? Well, the four set out on a date for a night of thrills on the back roads of Cove City. You see, all four had heard stories of the Cove City Light growing up, a mysterious floating light that appeared near the abandoned railroad tracks. Well, the guys, they wanted to impress the girls with a little scare. But the four had no idea what they were in store for as the night lingered on. The dirt road, it stretched out before them, dark and silent. The air, it smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. Tim parked the car near the tracks and killed the engine. "This is where people say it appears," he said with a proud grin. "Some even say it'll follow you all the way home." Lisa rolled her eyes with a nervous laugh. "You're just trying to scare us," she teased, though she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that was creeping up the back of her spine. Minutes passed. Each second felt like an eternity. The group, they sat in silence, listening to the distant hoot of an owl. Then, Michelle gasped. A glowing orb appeared in the distance. At first it was faint, like a firefly hovering in the dark. But then it grew brighter, pulsating with an unnatural energy. "Okay, that ain't funny," Dave muttered, but no one had made a move. Suddenly, the light surged forward, floating directly above the tracks, darting directly toward the car. The temperature inside the vehicle, well, it plummeted, their breath visible in the icy air. Lisa clutched Tim's arm as the radio crackled with static. "Go!" Dave shouted, Tim fumbling with the keys, but the engine wouldn't start. The light, it hovered just feet away, pulsating, watching. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The car mysteriously roared back to life, and without hesitation, Timmy slammed on the gas, speeding away. They all looked in the rearview mirror. The light, in some weird way, either bidding them goodbye and don't come back, or some type of evil chuckle. It flickered once more and stood still in the night, watching the frightened teenagers leave. Theories behind the light? Well, there are many about the Cove City Light's origins. They range from the scientific all the way down to, you know it, the supernatural. Now, on the paranormal side of things, some say it's the spirit of a tragic accident victim. They say it's the light of the ghostly lantern of a railroad worker, or perhaps a traveler who died tragically along the tracks, searching for something they might have lost. Others say there's a Civil War connection. Given the region's history, some believe the light is tied to a fallen Confederate or Union soldier whose spirits never found peace. Then maybe it's swamp gas or some type of natural phenomenon. Skeptics argue the light may be caused by ignited methane from nearby marshy areas, similar to the will-o-wisp stories. But one thing remains certain. Despite the passage of time and what it could be or what it might be, reports of the Cove City Light continue. Especially from late-night travelers and locals who grew up hearing the stories. Have you had an encounter with the Cove City Light? If so, let's hear from you. Until next time. A few years ago, in the fall of the year, two men, Mark and Daniel, set out on a weekend hiking trip in the Ozarks of northern Arkansas. This wasn't their first time hiking. They're no strangers to the wilderness, and this definitely wasn't their first rodeo. The air that day was described as being crisp, leaves painted in hues of red and gold, the leaves crunching underfoot as they followed a rugged, unmarked trail deep into the wilderness. They had been exploring for hours when they stumbled upon something that neither of them would ever forget. Nestled in a small clearing, partially obscured by gnarled old oak trees and pine trees, stood an old log cabin, looking completely abandoned. Its wooden walls warped from time, the roof sagging in places. Vines had crept up one side, gripping the structure like nature was trying to reclaim it. Despite the decay, something about the cabin felt terribly wrong. As they approached, Mark noticed something strange. Although the place looked deserted, there seemed to be signs of recent activity. The rocking chair on the porch creaked steadily, although there was no wind. Through the grimy windows, they could see a wooden table inside, set with old dusty plates and cups. Almost as if someone had left in a hurry a long time ago. Yet, among those dust-covered surfaces, one chair was clean, as though someone had been sitting there. Daniel pulled out his cell phone, but as he raised it to take a picture, the screen flickered and went completely blank. Now, his phone battery had been completely full just a few minutes before. Mark checked his own watch, only to find the second hand frozen in place. At this point, a sense of unease settled over them both. "I don't like this," Daniel muttered. Mark was quick to reply he didn't like it either. And without another word, they turned around and hurried back toward their camp. Both of them on edge the entire way. That night, well, neither one of them slept very well. They both complained of having really weird dreams of this log cabin. Well, wouldn't you know it, the next morning came. As usual, curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to retrace their steps. But when they arrived at the spot they knew the cabin had been earlier, nothing was there. No ruins, no foundations, no signs that a cabin had ever stood there. Just a complete empty clearing, untouched. Both men, deeply disturbed, left in a hurry. Mark made it his mission to find out everything he could about the area and if there was a cabin ever built there. He scoured through county records, old maps. He even made a few more trips to the area, including a small town general store and a diner, to ask questions from the locals. No record of a cabin ever being built in that area. It was as if the structure had only existed for them. A ghostly remnant lost in time. To this day, neither man can explain what they saw or why it vanished. A glitch in the matrix, time loop, time slip, a figment of their imagination. We can call it many names. But just maybe, somewhere in Arkansas in the Ozark Mountains, there's a ghostly cabin just waiting to be found. North Carolina is no stranger to eerie tales, but few are as unsettling as the chilling accounts of black-eyed children. These shadowy figures with pitch-black eyes have surfaced in the state, leaving those who encounter them gripped with dread and unanswered questions. 3 tales stand out: a Marine's harrowing late-night encounter at Camp Lejeune in 2009, and a very similar experience reported nearby at Camp Geiger. and finally an unnerving run-in near Raleigh's Triangle Town Center Mall. Could be, maybe, could these events be related? Or maybe it's just a figment of someone's imagination. Stay tuned as we explore these chilling tales of black-eyed children in the old Tar Heel state. It was a quiet November weekend in 2009 at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. A young Marine stationed in the infantry barracks along River Road decided to stay in, just watching movies on his third-floor room. Most of his fellow Marines were out for the night, leaving the barracks eerily still. As midnight approached, an unexpected knock at the door interrupted his solitude. Assuming it was his roommate, he opened the door, only to find two young children standing outside on the walkway. Their presence immediately set off alarms, whistles, and bells in his mind. The children were unnerving. Their eyes were entirely black, devoid of whites or irises. "It's cold outside," one of them said in a monotone voice. "We just want to come in and read." The Marine's instincts, honed through training, screamed at him to just shut the door. Something wasn't right. The children took a step closer, their empty eyes seemingly drawing him in. A cold wave of fear swept over him, and the Marine slammed the door and locked it. For several minutes, the children softly knocked. Their persistence was chilling. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the sound stopped. The next morning, he reported the strange encounter to the officer on duty, who just dismissed it as a drunken hallucination. But the Marine hadn't been drinking at all. The children and their predatory presence were all too real. Now, just a short 15-minute drive, roughly about 11 miles down the road from Camp Lejeune, lies Camp Geiger, another military base. Now, not long after the 2009 incidents, a similar story surfaced. A Marine reported seeing black-eyed children near the barracks. In his account, the children were seen lurking near the entrance of a building late at night. They didn't knock or speak, but simply stared at the Marine who had spotted them. Just like at Camp Lejeune, the children's presence was accompanied by an overwhelming sense of dread. The Camp Geiger Marine, completely unnerved and unable to shake the feeling of being watched, retreated inside, and when he returned moments later, the children were gone. The proximity of the two bases and the near identical descriptions of the black-eyed children raised disturbing questions. Could these shadowy figures be stalking the Marines or unexpected individuals under the cover of darkness? Now, 7 years later, and roughly 120 miles away in Raleigh, North Carolina, another encounter would deepen this mystery. Near the Triangle Town Center Mall, a woman named Carrie Kistner was walking her dog late one evening when she noticed a young boy standing alone by the parking lot. As she approached, she was struck by his unusual appearance. His eyes pitch black, and his face was unnervingly motionless and expressionless. The boy asked for help, requesting a ride home, but something about his voice was unnatural, and it sent chills down Carrie's spine. Well, Carrie, she tried to back away, but the boy just stepped closer. The whole atmosphere grew heavy with an indescribable fear. But she trusted her instincts, and she hurried to her car and drove off, leaving the boy standing in the dimly lit parking lot. When Carrie glanced back into her rearview mirror, however, this black-eyed child had vanished. So there you have it. 3 encounters separated by years and miles, yet eerily similar, from the military barracks of Camp Lejeune and Camp Geiger to the city streets of Raleigh, North Carolina. The black-eyed children seem to leave a trail of fear and unanswered questions. Are these figures mere urban legends, or is there something darker haunting the night in North Carolina? One thing is certain, though. Those who cross paths with these mystical, mysterious entities are left with memories that never fade and a lingering sense of unease every time the sun goes down. The following story took place along the North Carolina-Virginia border near Sparta, North Carolina. A father and his 12-year-old son were fishing. It was a quiet evening, with about 30 minutes of daylight left. They stood in the middle of the river, downstream from a bridge off Farmers Fish Camp Road, near a bend where the river turns northward. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered. A noise unlike the man had ever heard before filled the entire valley. In his own words, it sounded like people were being unalived, combined with some of the most unusual guttural growls he'd ever heard in his entire life. The man froze mid-cast, just standing there, all of his senses on high alert. His son was close by. He was scared. They both just stared at each other, the hair on the back of their necks standing straight up. The sound seemed to originate 300, maybe 400 yards to the east, which went near a small valley leading directly into the woods. It reverberated for what felt like an entire minute before abruptly just stopping, leaving the river valley in an eerie silence. I mean, nothing. No birds were making any noises, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just absolute silence. The only sound being made was the river itself. The father, trying to maintain his composure for the sake of his son, resumed casting his reel and very slowly started moving toward the boat ramp. His son followed without a word, nothing being said. Both of them just kept edging closer to safety. Once back at the truck, they finally allowed themselves to just take a deep breath. Now that evening, they both searched the internet for the sounds that they'd heard. But nothing came close. Nothing. The father, a 2-time Iraqi war veteran, he had experienced fear before, but nothing like this. He had hunted and fished in those woods for well over 30 years. He knew the sounds of the area. This wasn't a bobcat or any other familiar animal. Though neither one could even say what they thought it was, they just knew that they were left with a very unsettling thought. What if it was something entirely unknown? Or just maybe they had an encounter with Bigfoot. The following took place in the 1970s in the Ury National Forest, which is located in Montgomery County, North Carolina. On a crisp autumn day in the 1970s, 2 seasoned hunters ventured into the dense expanse of the Ury National Forest. It was a clear, cool day, perfect for tracking game. The men, both familiar with the forest terrain, planned to hunt separately, but remain within earshot of each other. Hours passed uneventfully until one of them failed to return to their agreed upon meeting spot. The remaining hunter, growing anxious, began to search, calling out his friend's name, and to his relief, he heard a reply. But something was wrong. The voice was off somehow. It sounded distorted, almost hollow. It echoed strangely in the forest, as though coming from every direction. Despite following the sound, the hunter never found his friend. Instead, he was left with the unsettling sensation of someone or something watching him. When the hunter finally emerged from the woods alone, he recounted his bizarre incident to authorities. A massive search effort was launched, involving volunteers, search dogs, helicopters, but no trace of the missing hunter was ever found. Now, over time, this story has become somewhat of a chilling legend. The locals whisper of something in the woods that, well, it has the ability to mimic human voices, all in an attempt to lure you deeper into the woods. Now, some dismiss this completely as superstition, but others avoid the area completely, unwilling to risk encountering whatever may be in those woods. All we know now is that the missing hunter's fate remains unknown. His disappearance in the Uri National Forest remains an unsolved mystery. In the dense woods near Corolla, North Carolina, locals speak of a mysterious figure known as the Ghost Hound, described as a massive black dog with fiery red eyes. As a ghostly presence, this spectral creature has been both terrifying and a comfort to those who have encountered it. The legend dates back to colonial times, with stories of the hound appearing to lost travelers or those who were in need. It's said to emerge silently from the shadows, its glowing red eyes piercing the darkness. Despite its imposing appearance, the ghost hound's intentions are always good. Witnesses claim it guides them to safety, skillfully navigating the treacherous terrain before vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. While the hound is a symbol of protection, its sudden and otherworldly presence, it tends to leave a lasting impression. To this day, visitors to the Corolla Woods often tread carefully, hoping to catch just a tiny glimpse or avoid the startling gaze of the ghost hound. The following tale of terror unfolded in the summer of 2017 within the rugged wilderness of Linville Gorge, North Carolina. Known as the Grand Canyon of the East, this remote and breathtakingly beautiful area became the scene for an eerie and unforgettable encounter. Two backpackers, both avid hikers with years of experience, had decided to spend a weekend exploring the Linville Gorge, the trails, the stunning vistas, everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon on their second night, they set up camp near a secluded overlook. The forest around them grew silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves and a gentle breeze. Then, just past midnight, an unsettling sound pierced the quiet, a slow, melodic whistling. Unlike any bird or animal they'd ever heard, it seemed to echo through the entire valley. Its source was impossible to pinpoint. At first, they just dismissed it as the wind playing tricks. But the whistling grew louder and more deliberate. Circling their campsite, it was as if someone or something was watching them from the shadows. The two hikers were gripped by an unease. They decided to pack up and hike back toward their car, using their headlamps to guide them, yet The whistling followed them, relentless, unbroken, every time they stopped to catch their breath. The whistling grew nearer and nearer. Their unease turned to outright fright when they noticed fresh footsteps, larger than a human's, and it was on the trail directly behind them. By dawn, they'd finally reached the vehicle, exhausted and shaken. The whistling, well, it stopped just as abruptly as it had begun. To this day, the backpackers are unable to explain what they heard that night. Locals believe it was the whistler of Linville Gorge, a ghostly presence said to haunt the entire area, luring the lost and weary deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Whatever spirit or something even more sinister, the whistler remains a mystery, leaving those who hear its haunting melody forever marked by the memory. Jacob had always felt at home in the Appalachian wilderness. An experienced hiker, he never really scared easily. That is, until this night. As he trudged along the fog-laced trail, the sun dipped below the treetops, casting an eerie shadow across his path. He was alone, or so he thought, until he heard a familiar voice. Jacob! It was his brother's voice, calling from behind a gnarled oak tree. Jacob froze. His brother was miles away at their campsite. Jacob! The voice called again. Same tone, same inflection. But something was off. It was too precise, too mechanical, as if someone or something was repeating it from memory. Against every instinct he ever thought of having, Jacob took a step forward. The woods fell silent. Then, in his own voice, whatever this was, whispered, Jacob, help me. His blood ran cold. The voice wasn't right. It was empty, hollow, like a recording playing through a broken speaker. The hair on his arm stood up, and a shadow shifted behind the tree. Jacob, well, he didn't want to see what it was. He ran, his heart pounding, until he reached the safety of their campsite. His brother was indeed there, fast asleep, never having called his name at all. Jacob never went hiking alone again.
It was a chilly autumn night in 1994 when Travis and his cousin Jake found themselves driving down a lonely back road in rural North Carolina. The road cut through a dense stretch of pine and oak known locally as Jenny Lind, named after an 1800s opera singer. A place whispered about in hushed tones by the older folks in town. Tales of strange lights, eerie voices, and shadowy figures had surrounded the area for decades. As the trucker's headlights cut through the darkness, Travis suddenly nudged Jake. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice tight. Just ahead, standing on the gravel shoulder, was a young woman. She was dressed in a faded blue dress, her blonde hair hanging in loose curls around her face. She held her arms close to her body, shivering against the night air. Without hesitation, Jake slowed the truck and pulled over. "You need a ride, miss?" he called out. The woman nodded silently and climbed into the back seat. She spoke softly, barely above a whisper, giving them an address a few miles up the road. As they drove, the truck filled with an unnatural chill, and a strange unease settled over Travis. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, the girl's face seemed oddly blurred, her expression unreadable. Minutes later, they reached the destination, a small, unlit farmhouse at the end of a dirt road. Jake turned to tell their passenger they had arrived, but the seat was empty and the door had never opened. The girl was gone. Shaken, they knocked on the farmhouse door. An elderly man answered, and his face paled when they described the girl. "That was my daughter," he murmured, eyes welling with tears. "She died in a car accident off Hardy Bridge 30 years ago."